We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side.
That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisades Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodjevics. Joining me today is Dr. Stephen Leeb, founder of Leeb Capital Management and also the author of China's Rise and the New Age of Gold. Dr. Leeb, thanks for joining me again today.
My pleasure, Tom. As always, my pleasure.
So you recently wrote an article about China's plan to introduce a digital renminbi. So what do you know about when this will be launched and why should any of this matter to us?
Well, it definitely should matter. And I think it's the beginning of a new age in terms of what's going to be a monetary system. I think it's become ever clearer that the dollar is not serving its purpose as a reserve currency. When our central bank prints $8 trillion and that money sits on banks' balance sheets as money they could lend out and they can't find anyone to lend to. I mean, there's something obviously wrong with what we're doing. And I could explain a little bit more detail, but what China has done, and it's not something that they've done, just all of a sudden they got angry. They've been researching this currency, a digital currency, for 7 years. And they're set to introduce it. And basically, my thinking is, and I wrote this in my book, is that currency critical to that currency is two things. One, that it be an international currency, but as an international currency, it not be governed by China, but it be a basket of different currencies. And that currency, that basket, initially it will be just the yuan. And it will initially just be used in China. And it will be introduced in February at the Olympics, I believe. And it will become equal to paper money. There'll be no difference between the digital currency and paper money. And I expect, given the Chinese prefer to deal in digital applications rather than paper applications, et cetera, it will be widely adapted in the country. And that will be the first step. It will also de facto be backed by gold. Any Chinese citizen in China, when they trade gold, unlike when they trade gold in the US or in London, they trade physical gold. And everybody is free to exchange their renminbi or yuan for gold anytime they want. And that will hold so with the digital currency. And there's a cartoon that really makes that clear, although China will never mention gold in context with a monetary system, it will make it clear that gold is what they're after. And I'll explain in a second why I think that's necessary. It will first, okay, so it will be first used by China, backed by gold, de facto. They won't say it's backed by gold, but it is. But then it will also be used for international purposes. And my guess is initially it will be used as a digital yuan rather than a digital basket of currencies. And then the next step, once it's accepted and once people see how easy it is to use. I mean, this is so much easier to deal with things digitally than it is to deal with the way we deal with things now. We use something called SWIFT, which is an acronym for something I cannot remember, but that's the basis of our monetary system. And it basically it communicates with banks where your delivery is on a particular product chain, and that's its purpose. It deals with banks and tells banks, how people that have shipped something, how far along. It really serves no purpose. It complicates things, basically. But it's a very great tool for the U.S. because it allows the U.S. to sanction people. And, whoever they want to sanction, they can sanction them because we, have that kind of power because we have a reserve currency. And through SWIFT, we get this information, whatever we want. And if somebody's not obeying our sanctions, heaven forbid, they will be allowed to use a particular bank because you really need dollars in today's world in order to, trade internationally. And SWIFT is a source of who's using dollars, who's not, et cetera. So China, and it's very cumbersome. The digital currency, even without gold backing, will be much simpler than what we're using today. And my guess is it will be adopted almost immediately by, certainly by the Chinese and very easily by so many countries in the East. I mean, China is now the world's biggest trader and by far the biggest trader in the East. Belt and Road Initiative, et cetera, all 142 countries. I can't say every one. I don't know about Italy, who I think is part of that. I'm not sure what they'll do. I'm not even sure what India will do, but my hunch is that they will use it too, especially if they know what's coming next and they want to be a part of what's coming next. And it's going to be accepted. And I think then the next step will be a basket of currencies. And the gold backing for the basket of currencies is critical because right now our problem in this world is that everybody is disadvantaged relative to the United States, which is bad for everybody, including the United States. We think we're doing very well because we have a reserve currency, and this gives us power to sanction other people. But it means that people don't want to cooperate with us. This gives us just too much power, and we're not using it wisely at all. We don't cooperate with others, and it's a catastrophic thing to be doing. And to have the freedom to print as much money as you want is not the freedom that you want at this point. It's a freedom that is, I think, catastrophic for the rest of the world, because the problem that we're running up against right now, Tom, is, in my opinion, not so much climate change. No one knows. I mean, I'm not saying climate change is happening or not happening. I don't know. I know that the most credible book that is out on climate change is something called Unsettled I'm looking over because I have the book to my right, by Stephen with a V, Koomin, Koomin. At long last, you can get that book on Amazon. And it basically is written by a fellow with credentials that, are just superlative. And maybe that's not too strong. Maybe that's too weak a word. I mean, he was provost of Caltech for, 10 years. He's worked with anybody in the scientific community, but he also was an advisor to Obama and Biden. He was secretary and a science advisor to Obama and Biden. And that credential attracted a lot of people to his book. I mean, there have been other credentialed people that have written books about climate change and, saying that, it's not what it is. And other people take very strong views that it's absolutely nonsense. This is not his point. His point is that we simply do not know. And that on a worst case basis, even if it's worse than we expect, and quite a bit worse, it doesn't pose an existential threat to humanity. We can deal with the worst case. And that's very worrisome because if we can deal with that worst case being out there as not being an existential threat to us, and that's basically what he's saying. It's not going to destroy humanity, even if we're wrong. And temperatures rise much faster than we expect. It's not a threat to all of humanity. We'll be able to deal with it, build dikes, et cetera, and continue to exist. And, will require a lot of work, but we will continue to exist. Now, my point of view, from everything I see around me, what is the existential threat? And I think China sees exactly the same thing. And this is why you need a gold backing at this point. is not anything special about gold. I mean, the only thing special about it is that it's not used for industrial purposes. It's valued because of its beauty for whatever reason. I'm not going to, say it has platonic value or anything. I don't know why. Maybe people have been using it for so many thousands of years that they've just come to accept it as a currency. I don't want to get distracted, but I have ADD. So you have to, so if I go off on a stretch, I'll come back to what I was saying. But the point is, in my view, our biggest threat right now, the existential threat that we face as a species, is running out of resources and not having enough resources, period. Whether it be water, whether it be energy, whether it be copper. Copper is a big one. And if we don't have enough energy of any kind, I mean, if we're going to need, my point is, we're going to need all the fossil fuels. All the energy in the world is going to be needed to build a society that is completely renewable, in which we don't need fossil fuels. You're going to need fossil fuels to get rid of fossil fuels, and you're going to need a tremendous amount of them. And you're going to need cheap energies to get rid of fossil fuels. It's absolutely the case. And the only way you're going to do this is first by recognizing that need, and second by controlling how much you could grow at a time, and having better control over the world's growth. If you're going to let us grow willy-nilly and use all our energies up, you're going to run into a lot of trouble. And it's going to happen sooner than later. And in fact, it's already happening to a certain extent. We read about the semiconductor shortage. And there is a semiconductor shortage. And you also will read that solar energy prices have started to go up. And they have. For the first time, I don't know since when. I mean, if you look at a chart of solar prices, it's just like, looks like a steep roller coaster ride to zero. And suddenly you've seen this pop. And one reason that you've seen this pop is that there's not a sufficient amount of cheap energy around. And the source of that cheap energy actually comes from China, is coal. And China has run out of, not coal, fortunately, but they've run out of factories that will make polysilicon that is used for solar panels and for also integrated circuits, in other words, semiconductors. And just to explain this, I mean, we can make polysilicon, and there's a few companies in Japan that can make it very, very pure. But making it in mass, there's only one place in the world that can happen, and that's in China. And, recently they've been, until recently, they have been using that cheap energy or lending it or letting the Bitcoin miners use it. But they basically have decided that, hey, we need this energy if we're going to keep solar prices cheap. Now, just to explain it, you can get, everybody talks about sand. Well, it's the most abundant quantity in the world. How many times do you hear that when you're talking about semiconductors, when you're talking about solar? They're made out of sand. That's what silicon is. It's just sand. Yeah, it's true. But it's a very special kind of sand. It's sand that either is 99.49, 9999, or 99.69 pure. And the only way you can do that is use very, very elaborate processing. Without that elaborate processing, you don't have semiconductors and you have very expensive solar energy. And that's what you basically have seen because China has run out of capacity and they're building more capacity, which, I mean, they'll need for themselves, but they also export it, which I think is a, pretty decent thing to do. I mean, if they really wanted to hurt us, they could stop exporting that, but they don't. But anyway, and that's one of the uses of cheap energy. And to me, that is in itself, in a nutshell, a reason for using cheap energy. We're using cheap energy, which is coal, to get rid of coal, because solar is a substitute for coal. But you're not going to have solar unless you're willing to use something as dirty as coal to get there. I mean, that's the message. And that is just the facts. That's the facts. I mean, that's something you'll read on. You can read it on Bloomberg if you search for it. You can read it anywhere. We need all the energy we can get to keep this world going and to create a world which is sustainable. And it's clear that with the dollar as a reserve currency, with countries, especially the US, free, as I said before, to print $8 trillion in money. I mean, they could try and corner the market on commodities, except they can't because China, that's China's job. I mean, I'm being facetious about it, but no, they're not trying to corner, but they've accumulated tremendous amounts of commodities. I mean, why? Because we're running out. And Robert Friedland, who's one of the most successful commodity investors of our time, he found, I don't know how many, major mines talking about copper. And says copper is, look at what's happening. We need so much more copper for electric vehicles and everything else. We don't have enough copper in the mines that are in the western part of the world in order to do that. I mean, copper right now, you're almost at an inflection point in mining copper. If you mine much more copper, the price in terms of energy is going to start skyrocketing and it's going to become super expensive. I mean, you've had this incredible bull market in copper in the midst of a pandemic and people are recognizing exactly what's involved. And what Friedland said, and it makes all the sense in the world, is because he owns he's talking his book. I don't want to make the guy into a saint or anything. And he's just talking, but what makes sense, he says, we're going to use all the hydro energy we can possibly find to develop those new mines in Africa. And he says hydro because it's going to be necessary to keep copper as cheap as we possibly can. If you're using an expensive source of energy, what's going to happen to copper? It's going to be higher in price. How are we going to get electricity from one place to another? It's going to cost us a lot more. We need all the energy we can possibly get, and we need to control how that energy is, distributed and used so that it's fair, so that everybody can participate. And you're not going to do that with the dollar as a sovereign currency. And that's what China is after. And that's what the gold backing is. They're not after control of the world. That's really important to recognize. They really are not. They are after a world that lives in harmony. And they don't care what religion you are. That's part of the Chinese. I can't stand the Chinese way of life. I could not live under that kind of regime, although I fear, as an aside, I might not have a choice living in America the way we're going sometimes. I really do feel that way. And it just horrifies me. But, China basically accepts everybody. And they want to cooperate. Europe's cooperating with them. We have to cooperate with them. And the only way you can get there, in my opinion, is if you can control the amount of money that we can spend on international transactions, that it just cannot be free. I mean, right now, money is free. We can print in this country an unlimited amount of money. And we could use that for any purpose. We can use it to sanction. We can use it, and it wouldn't do us any good. I mean, in the end, it just hasn't done us any good. And we've gone backwards in terms of technologies and a lot of things in this country. And I think it would be corrected. I think it would be good for everybody. But that's the deal with the digital yuan. That's why it's so important. It's going to demonstrate first to people there's a much better way of trading, even if it's not gold-backed, than what we're using now, much less cumbersome. And it keeps the United States off your back, which is a big deal in the East. And it probably will be accepted. Like I said, China, it's a leading trader for about, out of 100 countries, the economists reported they're the leading trader for about 68 versus maybe 35 for the US. I may not have the numbers exactly right. They're going to get that accepted in the eastern part of the country, eastern part of the world. The question is, what will the U.S. do? And I'm hoping that, we will see the light of day, because there's definitely a big place for us. Did I go on too long? I'm sorry if I did.
Not a problem. We have a lot to dig into there, Dr. Leeb. So why don't we start by we use these terms renminbi and yuan seemingly interchangeably. What's the difference between those two terms?
I don't think there is, to be very honest with you. I think it's like saying the dollar and the buck. I mean, one's a little bit more formal use, or it's like saying the greenback and the buck, or the greenback and the dollar. I don't see any real difference in those words. And I've never, I may be missing something. I mean, I'm sure there's some formality to renminbi that there isn't to the yuan, but it's not a meaningful distinction from everything that I can see. And anyone knows that I'm wrong, I would really appreciate knowing it, because then I'm making a fool of myself.
And how do we think about what the possibility of that they're going to back this digital currency with gold?
I think we're horrified. Because it will control the amount of currency. Basically, look, I wrote about this in my book, which you said, I actually forget the name of my book, The Rise of China and the New Age of Gold. Mm-hmm. Right. And gold, if you want to convince yourself of this, look at the correlations between gold and any other variable you can think of. And look at the correlations between the dollar and any other variable you can think of. They're incredibly strong. Gold has always been a threat to the dollar. From the day Nixon took us off the gold standard, it was still considered by many to be the currency of choice. And to this day, it's now, in fact, that correlation has started to rise because it's become a more visible threat, but it's very, very high. People talk about real interest rates. They're negative. That should cause gold to rise. Well, it hasn't. To at least not to the extent it did in the past. But right now, I mean, the proof of the pudding is this incredibly strong negative correlation between gold and the dollar. And if you look at the way gold has been trading of late, and this is paper gold, and that's one thing that's got to go and will go. My guess is with gold as a gold standard, you're not going to be trading paper gold, or if you are, it'll be paper that is 100% backed by gold or 80%, something like that, not 1% backed by gold, which is what is the case today. I mean, paper gold is I don't want to accuse anybody of manipulation. I don't have evidence of it. But when I see Sunday morning Sunday evening in U.S. time, and Sunday morning when no one's active in any market whatsoever, somebody's selling $3 billion worth of gold. Either they are the stupidest person in the world that just happened to inherit a lot of gold and just wanted to see what they could get, which is really, really doubtful, because the person who had that money initially would have known that his or her child, needed help. I'm being facetious, but I mean, you cannot rationalize somebody selling $2 to $3 billion. I think it was $3 billion worth of gold all at one time at the quietest possible time of the week when no one is there, which is Sunday, around 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock. I was there. It happened to be, one of the times I was doing research, and I was looking at, this is crazy. I mean, it felt like it crashed in a matter of minutes. I mean, boom, boom, boom. No one does that. Now, I'm not saying, because I don't know, that it's manipulation, but wow, it certainly is suspicious. Yes, we are fighting tooth and nail against this happening. It also told me the credibility of it happening, that this is a real, this is not something that, has just occurred to me, and I wrote about this in my book, that gold is going to back a new kind of currency. But it's something that people are scared of in this country, because if, I hate to say it, the most likely case in my mind is that this was done deliberately. And if it was done deliberately, who would have done it? It had to be central banks selling paper gold. I mean, no one else is going to take that kind of chance. No one else can afford. I mean, you lose it. It just doesn't, it's the most likely. Can I say it's 100% no? And I don't want to be accused of saying that I'm accusing the government of some sort of conspiracy. I'm not doing that, but I'm just saying it's weird. And the negative correlation that continues to persist, and the fact that, gold going down tends to boost the dollar because of, the automatic negative correlation. That's always been the case. And you see that too. I'm the kind of nerd that stays up at night and I watch these trading patterns. Sometimes you don't even have to watch gold. All you have to watch is the dollar. And if you see the dollar going up and you're long gold, you're in trouble. You know that gold's probably going to be going down almost instantaneously. Now, that doesn't hold 100% of the time, but it holds enough of the time to make you very, very suspicious. So, yes, I think that we are really scared and don't want gold to be part of the monetary system. But I think it's too late. I don't think we can fight it anymore. And I think it's going to become commonplace in the East. I think the digital yuan or renminbi, one reason I don't say renminbi is I don't speak very well. Sometimes I have trouble with long words. But anyway, so the digital yuan, I think, is, something that scares everyone in this country because they know where China's headed. And it's really not a secret. If you read in 2009, the head of the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, wrote a white paper. And he said, and I'm sort of interpreting this, but I think my interpretation is accurate, and you can check it. You can find it. You could check my interpretation in my book. And basically, he said that Bretton Woods made a terrible mistake. Instead, they should have taken the SDR, used that as a currency, and backed it by something else. And he didn't say explicitly what the something else is, but it was clearly not something that we were going to run out of. If you back the renminbi with rhodium, which is the rarest metal in the world that you may run out of, it's not going to do you much good. But if you back it by gold, which there's plenty of, and the price will have to rise dramatically in order to assure that trading, et cetera, can, take place, it makes sense. Gold is the only commodity out there that can also call itself a currency. And the reason that is because gold, again, has no industrial uses. 10% of it is used for industry, and that can easily be substituted by either copper or silver. And silver is another one that is also a monetary metal. And you see the same kind of thing going on with silver, but it's a little less apparent because silver does have industrial uses that are very important industrial uses. So they can't go quite as far with silver as they go with gold. But yes, an answer is a long way of saying, but 50 years of history and what you're seeing today explicitly within the intensity of the dollar gold, correlation and suggests to me that we're scared to death. We are fighting it tooth and nail, anything to do with gold. Yes, I believe we are. And I believe we will not succeed. And I believe that, we're trying everything we can, including, Bitcoin is in my view of things, advocating for Bitcoin, which is really what you see, despite what they say, a lot of the financial institutions in this country, they say energy, be clean, be this, be that. At the same time, they're going to trade Bitcoin. They're going to, do IPOs involving Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a big danger, but it's also a big threat to gold. And, I think that is part and parcel. We know it's dangerous. The government knows that Bitcoin is dangerous. Yet, why in the world is it still around? If you listen to people like Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, yeah, I know they're old. I'm old too. But he's still doing a hell of a job managing Berkshire Hathaway. Charlie Munger, if you listen to him, is more articulate than I am. Maybe that's not saying much, but he's 100. And, I'm not quite there yet. These people do have an idea. It's used for, laundering money. It's used has it ever occurred to anyone that anytime they attack, like when they stop the flow of oil or from Texas, or the flow of gasoline from Texas to New York, they wanted Bitcoin as ransom? It's a great way of, committing crimes. And it's also uses tremendous amounts of clean energy, which is exactly what we want if we want to get rid of fossil fuels. We want, to use as much clean energy as we want for the right things, which is getting rid of fossil fuels. And we're going to have to use fossil fuels for that too. I think I'm getting too carried away with this, but I mean, yes, we hate gold, and we will do anything we can, including recommending things that we have to know are terrible for our society, for clean energy and everything else. We're not recommending Bitcoin explicitly, but I don't see anyone saying, hey, this is what's used to launder money. Maybe it should be outlawed, or maybe it should be really, really tightly regulated. Have you heard that from any of these financial institutions? No. But how many ETFs do you see sponsored by financial institutions that are dedicated to Bitcoin? That's fine. They'll do that. So, in answer to your question, yes, again, yes, emphatically. Yes, we hate gold to the extent that we'll do almost anything to avoid and to keep us away from a gold standard and keep the world out of a gold standard, even if it involves doing things and spreading things that are really dangerous in and of themselves. So yes, we hate gold and we'll fight it, but we're not going to be successful.
So in the article, you also mentioned that the risk of a major financial crisis for the U.S. being an inevitability. So what do you see as some of the biggest pieces of today's financial landscape that pose this risk?
Well, I mean, look, when you print and when you start buying as many bonds as you're buying, and you see, it's just this financial world we're living in right now, Tom, is so out of whack. You have 10-year yields around 1.30. You have 30-year bonds under 2%. You are buying bonds, and the only reason this happens is that you are buying so many of these things, so many of these financial instruments. Every bit that the economy or the government issues, you're buying. And what happens is that bubbles are created. It doesn't cost anything to take a mortgage out on a home. Nothing, basically. So you have, home prices going through the roof. And it's supported by, very lenient terms on mortgages. And your payment on these mortgages is basically, 1.5%, whatever 2%, whatever 1.3% yields imply. It's way out of whack with the kind of growth you're seeing in this economy, even slowing down. You're seeing 3%, 4% growth. You're seeing 5% inflation. In the past, those kinds of numbers would imply bond yields, even just the growth that we're having. If inflation were zero, they would imply bond yields of 3%, because and growth was 3%, because that's what you need to ration money. You don't want people just investing in anything. Yields control that. To have 1.3% yields in the context of nominal growth that's 10% is crazy, and it results in all sorts of bubbles. Dare I mention Bitcoin as a possible bubble? People can borrow for nothing and buy Bitcoin. When you go to these exchanges that allow you to buy, stuff on, heavy margin, what margin interest are you paying? Virtually nothing. And in some cases, no commission. You're just paying for order flow. So yes, you're going to have crazy bubbles. People have, they can multiply whatever they have to invest by many, many times as a result of our financial policies, keeping interest rates as low as they are now. They are so artificially low. It's ridiculous. Look at the monies that Amazon and Facebook and so many of even General Electric companies are earning a lot of money today. We don't need these kinds of low interest rates. It's not doing anybody any good, but it is creating conditions that we would call a bubble. It's exactly like, the housing bubble that you saw, except it's not just confined to housing, housing where everybody was buying, no money down. Hey, I remember getting calls from somebody. I've got a house to sell you. Well, thanks. I've got a bridge to sell you. But, no money down and it's yours. I said, thank you. But no thanks. Maybe one of the wisest things I ever did. But, when money's free, you create bubbles. Money is virtually free today. In the context of the kind of growth we have, and, the fact that wages are rising, that everything is rising in price, it's super free. You don't even have to believe that there'll be growth. Just bet on inflation and invest on something that's going to go up because of inflation. Invest in a copper mine. Invest in Freeport. Overinvest in it because it's copper's going up in price. Metals are going to go. Everything is going up. It's crazy. The financial system has to have a reckoning. The only thing that can save us, again, is if we, segue slowly into a new monetary system. You cannot be free to print money. Money cannot be free. Money right now is essentially free. And that is begging for a catastrophe. Inevitable, that's always too strong a word to use. But let me say, probabilities of over 95% are virtually assured of a major crash happening. The candidates, besides home, again, would be something like Bitcoin. And I know people are going to hate me for saying that, but I can explain why in a little while. That I like crypto. I like Ethereum. I'm not I'm not anti-crypto at all, but, I'm anti-bubbles. And anything that can create a bubble like Bitcoin, where you don't have that much of it, where you just have a finite amount of supply, and an unlimited amount of money, is a bubble in the making, is a potential for a major bubble. And if Bitcoin got to a valuation of $3 or $4 or $5 trillion, which people are claiming, you go all over the internet, you're seeing forecasts of $2 million Bitcoin and things like that. If it ever got up there, it would be a total catastrophe. So yes, there are a lot of candidates for bubbles. It's like the tulip craze that you read about in the textbooks. When you have unlimited amounts of money, you can make anything as valuable as you want it to be. And that's what we have. And when you have conditions like that, it's not going to end. It's going to end in tears. So that's where we're headed. That's why I would say it's virtually inevitable.
So, Dr. Leeb, I'd like to go back to something you were talking about the energy side of things. And I'd like to get your thoughts around how oil fits into this picture. Isn't it easier for developing countries, as you were saying, that are going to have this big demand for energy and resources? Isn't it easier for them to use oil and coal as a source of energy rather than the greener, more complex energy systems?
It's not overly easier, Tom. It's absolutely necessary. And you know what? It's necessary in the US too. It's necessary worldwide to use all our energies in order to get to a point where we are energy independent of fossil fuels. In order to get rid of fossil fuels, you're going to have to use every fossil fuel and probably all of them and use them judiciously in order to build the kind of infrastructure that we will need to create a renewable society, which basically has two energy carriers, hydrogen and electricity. Right now, we're only on electricity. And we're nowhere yet. Renewable energies are, maybe, 20% of electricity, which itself is 15% of total energy consumption. We want to get to the point where we can use hydrogen to heat, let's say, industrial processes instead of using natural gas. To get there is going to require all the energies in the world. And yet you see the US and part of Europe outlawing oil, not outlawing it, trying to restrict it. It's a religion. Climate change has become a religion in this country. And again, I'm not saying it's not true, but the data for it just doesn't jive. And the pushback against that data is just crazy. So it's not just the developing world that needs oil and coal and all these energies. It's us too. We're going to pay a huge price if we, start outlawing that stuff. We're already paying some sort of price with oil at $70. You had President Biden the other day calling the Saudis and telling them to ramp up their production. A very scary thing to anybody should be the fact that Russia's having trouble producing more oil, even though under OPEC guidance and guidelines, they're allowed to produce an extra 200,000 barrels. They're having trouble doing it. That shouldn't be cause for cheer for, a teenager in Sweden. I mean, I repressed her name, but this is just crazy. I mean, we're being led by a teenager in Sweden. I mean, how much sense does this make on its face? It makes no sense. And to cheer that, right. I'm sure people are cheering that Russia's having trouble increasing their oil. It's horrifying. That's the existential threat that we're facing, Tom. Where climate change is not an existential threat. I mean, a book, can I show the book? Mm-hmm. Just show people this book. Order it. Instead of ordering my book, order this one, because I really want to help people. The reason I mention it, this book is written by one Stephen E. Koomin, Koomin. And he was in the Department of Energy under the Obama-Biden administration. And basically is as well regarded as any scientist in the world can be. And he served as, an advisor. This book doesn't take a stand on climate change. It said it could be worse, or it could be better, or it could be non-existent. He doesn't take a stand. What he does take a stand on is that we know nothing. We know nothing about, and when I use nothing, I sort of mean nothing. I've talked to, or I know, and I'm not going to say names, but I've talked to computer people, and one person who is one of the best regarded computer people in the country today, honestly, he created, some of the finest algorithms that we know today. His take on IPCC models for climate is worthless. I've talked to other people equally talented, and they have no axe to grind, none, who say these models, their projections of 2 degrees, whatever it is, you do better or as well as random numbers. They're nothing more than random number generators.
So, Dr. Leeb, as you mentioned these books and your book here, China's Rise and the New Age of Gold, it's been about a year since it's come out. Is there anything that you wish you could have changed now that you have that perspective of looking back over this last year?
About what I wrote?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think so. I think, I'm not going to get everything exact. But I mean, basically the thesis of the book is, that we will have this. I mean, the book says what I'm saying about the digital currency mm-hmm. being backed by gold. Look, if China tries to go their own way and have a digital yuan backed by gold and make that the world's reserve currency, then a pox on me. I was crazy wrong. And I should live it down. I should be really, horrified, but I do not think that's where we're headed. Mm-hmm. And that is not what, the most revered financial figure in China said. I mean, I'm basically just interpreting him. So, I mean, no, I have no reason when you say anything, I mean, I would update it with more recent data, but, I date the decline of America, and it has been a decline. It's been accelerating to when we went off the gold standard in 1971. I mean, there were things before that, Vietnam, et cetera. I'm not saying, but that's the event you can point to. That was a clear, crystal clear event after which everything changed. The American dream slowly drifted away, and some say is now an American nightmare. I want to get back to where we were then. Mm-hmm. And I think the way to do that, the only way feasible right now is to use some sort of gold-backed reserve currency. And not only can, we come back to, more real thinking and better thinking, but I think we have a chance to save the planet. I really do. Mm-hmm. I haven't given up. I'm not a pessimist, but some of the things that we're doing right now are just so horrifying to me. It really worries me. It keeps me up at night. I worry for our progeny. I mean, I really do. And like I was mentioning, I don't know whether, it's worth mentioning again, but extinctions happen. I mean, they're the law of the land. And we are almost following that path by focusing on a problem that is not anywhere near as important as the problem we should be focusing on. Scarcity of resources. And, fracking is such a good example of it. I mean, we made ourselves think oil was free. I mean, we could get as much as we want. Oops, we lost about $1 trillion in fracking, in cash money, when you count everything else included. And now all of a sudden, fracking, they're still trying to keep up a little bit, but they'll never get back to where they were because people realized it. Hey, you guys aren't earning any money. You just keep borrowing more money. And when you sum it all up and the opportunity costs and the water and everything else that's been used, I would say about $1 trillion. Not as much as the wars we fought, but I mean, it's in that neighborhood, what we lost, all for what interest? I mean, who did that serve is what I'm trying to figure out. I still haven't figured it out. But I would say expect much higher oil prices, but expect much, much higher gold prices. Much higher. No, and I would not, again, answering your question, there's nothing I would take back. I think our problem started when we went off the gold standard. And if there's any chance of resolving our problem, it will be a new type of gold standard, one that involves the entire world.
Excellent, Dr. Leeb. Is there anything else you'd like to mention here before we wrap up today?
Very quickly, I would, for reasons that I've said, Bitcoin is something not to do. I know it's tempting. It's crazy. It uses way too much energy, and it uses the best energy, cheap energy, the exact kind of energy we need to make solar panels and integrated circuits. That's the kind of energy Bitcoin uses. That's why China got rid of the miners. I'm convinced of that. So they could, manufacture more solar panels and more integrated circuits. Not needed. Ethereum, on the other hand, I think everybody should be, possibly involved in Ethereum. It's a wonderful cryptocurrency. And if we want to be assured of keeping our freedoms, use something that, I think if Ethereum 2.0 comes, we'll use 1/1000th of the amount of energy Bitcoin uses and will be much more versatile. And that would be, one recommendation that I would really make. The other recommendation is, own commodities, own gold. And, read Cummins before you read my book. That's all I can say. I'll sum it up by that.
Excellent. Of course, if anybody wants more information, you're available at stephenleeb.com. Anywhere else you'd like to mention, Dr. Leeb?
That'll get me. There are probably other places, but I don't, they don't come to mind right away. But that'll, yes, you can. And I think you can even leave me a note on that. If you can, I'll make it possible.
Perfect. Excellent. Dr. Leeb, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us.
And I want to say how much I've learned from you. I really do. I hope your audience realizes how good and how thoughtful and how bright you are. I mean, you're really, quite a guy. I'm not just saying that for the sake of flattery, but it's true. So whatever.
I really appreciate that, Dr. Leeb. And I thank you for your perspective as well.
Thank you.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.